The Adventures of Chatterer the Red Squirrel by Thornton W. Burgess. Old Mr. Trouble gets Chatterer at last. What happened next to Chatterer, and Chatterer is sure that this is his last day. Chapter 10. Old Mr. Trouble gets Chatterer at last. Of course, you have guessed what it was that Chatterer had been meddling with. It was a mouse trap, and he had sprung it without getting hurt. Chatterer didn't know that it was a trap. He ought to have known, but he didn't. You see, it was not at all like the traps Farmer Brown's boy had sometimes set for him in the Green Forest. He knew all about those traps and never went near them. Now that there was nothing more exciting about the mouse trap, Chatterer turned his attention to the other queer thing. He walked all around it and looked at it from every side. It certainly was queer. Yes, Sir, it certainly was queer. It looked something like a little house, only he could see all through it. He put one paw out and touched it. Nothing happened. He tried it again. Then he jumped right on top of it. Still nothing happened. He tried his sharp teeth on it, but he couldn't bite it. You see, it was made of stout wire. Inside was something that looked good to eat. It smelled good, too. Chatterer began to wonder what it would taste like. The more he wondered, the more he wanted to know. There must be some way of getting in, and if he could get in, of course he could get out again. He jumped down to the floor and ran all around the queer little wire house. At each end was a sort of little wire hallway. Chatterer stuck his head in one. It seemed perfectly safe. He crept a little way in and then backed out in a hurry. Nothing happened. He tried it again. Still nothing happened. "Better keep away," said a little voice deep inside of him. "Pooh! Who's afraid?" said Chatterer. "This thing can't hurt me." Then he crept a little farther in. Right in front of him was a little round doorway with a little wire door. Chatterer pushed the little door with his nose, and it opened a teeny-weeny bit. He drew back suspiciously. Then he tried it again, and this time pushed the little door a little farther open. He did this 2 or 3 times, until finally he had his head quite inside, and there, right down below him, was that food he so wanted to taste. "I can hop right down and get it and then hop right up again," thought Chatterer. "Don't do it," said the small voice inside. "Corn is plenty good enough. Besides, it is time you were getting back to the Old Orchard." "It won't take but a minute," said Chatterer, "and I really must know what that tastes like." With that he jumped down. Snap! Chatterer looked up. The little wire door had closed. Old Mr. Trouble had got Chatterer at last. Yes, Sir, he certainly had got Chatterer this time. You see, he couldn't open that little wire door from the inside. He was in a trap. The wire rat trap set by Farmer Brown's boy. Chapter 11. What happened next to Chatterer? Were you ever terribly, terribly frightened? That was the way Chatterer felt. He was caught. There was no doubt about it. His sharp teeth were of no use at all against those hard wires. He could look out between them, but he couldn't get out. He was too frightened to think. His heart pounded against his sides until it hurt. He forgot all about that queer food he had so wanted to taste, which was right before him now. Indeed, he felt as if he never would want to eat again. What was going to happen to him now? What would Farmer Brown's boy do to him when he found him there? Hark! What was that? It was a step just outside the door of the corn crib. Farmer Brown's boy was coming. Chatterer raced around his little wire prison and bit savagely at the hard wires, but it was of no use at all. It only hurt his mouth cruelly. Then the door of the corn crib swung open. A flood of light poured in, and with it came Farmer Brown's boy. "Hello!" exclaimed Farmer Brown's boy. as he caught sight of Chatterer. "So you are the thief who has been stealing our corn, and I thought it was a rat or a mouse. Well, well, you little red rascal, didn't you know that thieves come to no good end? You're pretty smart, for I never once thought of you, but you are not so smart as you thought. Now I wonder what we had better do with you." He picked up the trap with Chatterer in it and stepped out into the beautiful great out of doors. Chatterer could see across the dooryard to the old orchard and the familiar old stone wall along which he had scampered so often. They looked just the same as ever, and yet, well, they didn't look just the same, for he couldn't look at them without seeing those cruel wires which were keeping him from them. Farmer Brown's boy put the trap down on the ground and began to call. "Puss, puss, puss!" called Farmer Brown's boy. Chatterer's heart, which had been thumping so, almost stopped beating with fright. There was Black Pussy, whom he had so often teased and made fun of. Her yellow eyes had a hungry gleam as she walked around the trap and sniffed and sniffed. Never had Chatterer heard such a terrible sound as those hungry sniffs so close to him. Black Pussy tried to put a paw between the wires, and Chatterer saw the great cruel claws. But Black Pussy couldn't get her paw between the wires. "How would you like him for breakfast?" asked Farmer Brown's boy. "Meow," said Black Pussy, arching her back and rubbing against his legs. "I suppose that means you would like him very much," laughed Farmer Brown's boy. "Do you think you can catch him if I let him out?" "Meow," replied Black Pussy again, and to poor Chatterer it seemed the awfulest sound he had ever heard. "Well, we'll see about it by and by," said Farmer Brown's boy. "There's the breakfast bell, and I haven't fed the biddies yet." Chapter 12. Chatterer is sure that this is his last day. There was no hope, not the teeniest weeniest ray of hope in the heart of Chatterer, as Farmer Brown's boy picked up the wire rat trap and started for the house, Black Pussy, the cat, following at his heels and looking up at Chatterer with cruel, hungry eyes. Chatterer took a farewell look at the old orchard, and way beyond it the Green Forest, from which he had been driven by fear of Shadow the Weasel. Then the door of the farmhouse closed and shut it all out. If there had been any hope in Chatterer's heart, the closing of that door would have shut the last bit out. But there wasn't any hope. Chatterer was sure he was to be given to Black Pussy for her breakfast. Farmer Brown's boy put the trap on a table. "What have you there?" called a great voice. It was the voice of Farmer Brown himself, who was eating his breakfast. "I've got the thief who has been stealing our corn in the crib," replied Farmer Brown's boy. "And who do you think it is?" "One of those pesky rats," replied Farmer Brown. "I'm afraid you've been careless and left the door open sometime, and that is how the rats have got in there." "But it isn't a rat, and I don't believe that there is a rat there," replied Farmer Brown's boy in triumph. "It's that little scamp of a Red Squirrel we've seen racing along the wall at the edge of the old orchard lately. I can't imagine how he got in there, but there he was, and now here he is." "What are you going to do with him?" asked Farmer Brown, coming over to look at Chatterer. "I don't know," replied Farmer Brown's boy, "unless I give him to Black Puss for her breakfast. She has been teasing me for him ever since I found him." Farmer Brown's boy looked over to the other side of the table as he said this, and his eyes twinkled with mischief. "Oh, you mustn't do that! That would be cruel!" cried a soft voice. "You must take him down to the Green Forest and let him go." A gentle face with pitying eyes was bent above the trap. "Just see how frightened the poor little thing is. You must take him straight down to the Green Forest right after breakfast." "Isn't that just like Mother?" cried Farmer Brown's boy. "I believe it would be just the same with the ugliest old rat that ever lived. She would try to think of some excuse for letting it go." "God made all the little people who wear fur, and they must have some place in His great plan," said Mrs. Brown. Farmer Brown laughed a big, hearty laugh. "True enough, Mother," said he. "The trouble is, they get out of place. Now this little rascal's place is down in the Green Forest, and not up in our corn crib." "Then put him back in his right place," was the prompt reply, and they all laughed. Now all this time poor Chatterer was thinking that this surely was his last day. You see, he knew that he had been a thief, and he knew that Farmer Brown's boy knew it. He just crouched down in a little ball, too miserable to do anything but tremble every time any one came near. He was sure that he had seen for the last time the Green Forest and the Green Meadows and jolly Mr. Sun and all the other beautiful things he loved so, and it seemed as if his heart would burst with despair.